How you doing, folks? This is Sean McVay, Sean's Outdoor Adventures. I want to welcome you to this episode. I'm calling this Behind the Scenes. I'm going to talk about my hunting season, tell you about things that were going on in the background that I did not specifically say in the videos as they rolled out this season. Also, if you've been tuning in for the giveaway, the next thing I'm going to do after this is I'm going to do a live broadcast next week. So I'll put the link for the live broadcast in the description section of this video. In the description section, also in this video, I'm going to have a link for a Google form that you can sign up to get in the giveaway. So this is me trying to make sure that people who have followed the videos are the people who are winning the prizes. It's my way of thanking my viewers. So that's what's happening. And in order to win, you've had to track the scripture verses that I put in each episode. And I had a couple extra ones picked out that I never got to. I'll just put them on the screen right now. So those are scripture verses I would have used in other episodes if I had gotten more deer. Hopefully you've noticed a little bit of a theme going on with the scripture verses. But first I want to get into the very first hunt I did this year. It was in the urban zone. So I was kind of like thinking about my dad out there, and internally I was dedicating that hunt to my dad. Now, this was my first hunt with the Panther Quick Climber that I received from the company to try it out. And so I had tried it out in a video. I hadn't actually shot from the Quick Climber at this point in time. So I got up in there. I hadn't even set foot on this property since the year before because I knew where I wanted to hunt. Why go in there and booger it up? So this is my first time in there, my first time using this. So before daylight, I decided to just draw back to see what it felt like. And lo and behold, right when I did that, it was just before dawn. A deer was looking up at me, and I was, skylined, and I just saw its tail go up, and it ran away. I was like, oh, great. Off to a great start here. So when it gets daybreak, I just hear so much snorting down through the woods. Like, I know there's another hunter that has permission to hunt the property I'm on, but he also knows that I hunt there, so he often hunts the next property over. And the snorting was right by where he was at. So I'm thinking, all right, he's in his stand down there, and maybe he shot at one. I don't know what's going on, but they were snorting for like a solid half hour. Eventually, I looked over, and I see a fawn nervously go by. So I figured the guy shot the mom, something like that. Well, maybe 10 minutes go by, and I look down through the woods, and I see a doe coming. It's a young doe. I could tell it was at least a 1.5-year-old doe. And the way that you tell, in case you're not familiar with this, is you look at the distance from the eye to the tip of the nose and the eye to the ear. Now, if it's a fawn, that distance from the eye to the tip of the nose and the eye to the ear is almost the same. When it's an adult doe, or at least a 1.5 years old or older, the distance from the eye to the ear is much shorter than the distance from the eye to the end of the nose. That snout always grows out on a deer that's a little bit older. So I could tell right away this is at least a 1.5-year-old deer. And I'm like, okay, urban zone, let's get my first one on the ground. Now, this deer dropped over in about 40 yards, perfect heart shot. When I gutted it out, the broadhead went right through the middle of the heart. It was maybe 9 yards from the base of the tree, and I got all kinds of criticisms from people. Oh, you should have grunt stopped him. You should have did this. You should have done that. I'm like, it was a heart shot, and the deer died in 40 yards. I don't know how much more you want, but whatever. You're always going to have critics out there, so you just got to let it roll off your back, keep going. Now, this particular day, the temperature was going to hit 88 degrees, so I had to deal with the deer. Interestingly enough, my job is pastoral minister of discipleship at St. Jude Catholic Church, and that day we were going to do some home visits as one of the parts of my ministry, and one of the guys who was going out in that ministry with me is the property where I was hunting. So I had like maybe 2.5 hours to deal with the deer and then get ready to go on home visits. So with it being 88 degrees and we're going to be doing home visits that day, plus it's my first deer, I do like to donate the first one. I took this to one of the meat lockers that takes deer for the Hush program in Iowa. You can donate your deer to Feed the Hungry. So this deer went to Feed the Hungry. Well, that deer, emotionally, I dedicated that one to my dad, who got me into hunting all the way back when. That night, I was supposed to go back out and do an evening sit, but it was so hot, I was like, you know what? It's going to be 60 degrees in the morning. Maybe I'll just go out then. So, being Catholic, we have Mass Saturday evening. So, in the Old Testament, the Sabbath began at sundown the night before. The tradition holds true in the Catholic Church. The Sunday observance begins at sundown the night before. So you can go to Mass on Saturday night, and it counts as your weekly observance of going to church. So I talked to my family. I was like, hey, how about we go to Mass tonight, and that way maybe I can go hunting in the morning. So everybody was on board. We went to Mass, which we could do because we didn't have any ministry duties that particular Sunday. So the next morning, well, actually, I was watching the weather, and they were calling for thunderstorms in the morning. So I'm like, well, that ruins my plan. So in the morning, I got up, and they were calling for thunderstorms, but it wasn't raining, even though it was showing like we might get thunderstorms. So I ended up like scrambling and getting to the tree stand later than I wanted to be there. But it was still just barely cracking daylight. In this situation, I'm hunting near a train track, and I hunted there many times in the past, and for the first time ever, the train stopped and went in reverse. I don't know if they forgot something. I don't know what was going on, if they had to hook up more trailers, whatever, but they went in reverse for a little ways, and a deer spooked up down the path from me while this was going on. And it's so thick that time of year, this is like September 22nd. I could not see the deer where it went. I had no idea. Maybe 10 minutes goes by, and all of a sudden, an eruption of all this noise directly under the tree stand happens. I look down, and the deer must have came in and maybe was sniffing where I walked. Maybe it got a whiff of me, and it ran out. So I'm at full draw, and there's part of me that's tempted to like just take a shot, hit the spine, but it's like, no, this is not a good quality shot, and I want to wait for a good one. So I don't get the shot. I end up easing down. Eventually the deer walks around, and it comes through. There's a couple shot windows I have, and I could have took a shot in the first shot window, but I'm like, you know what, she's going for the next shot window, and it's a better angle into the vitals, so I'm going to wait. I ended up clipping the spine a little bit anyway, and then putting a second arrow into it. If you ever get a spine shot, it's good to always put a second shot into the vitals as quick as possible to help put the deer out as quick as possible. And one of the things that kind of made me chuckle is the landowner who's letting me hunt this property. This is my first year hunting this property, and he can't stand the deer. I mean, they just eat all of the plants in the garden, and he's just sick of them, so he wants them gone. And so he texted me that day. He's like, hey, so that blood all over the ground, is that going to scare the other deer off? I'm like, well, maybe all that disturbance of me being in there might, push them out for a few days, but ultimately they're going to come back. So I kept hunting that spot to try to get some more deer for him, just because I knew how much he really wanted to get some out of there. All right, so now I've got 2 deer down on 2 hunts. The next hunt, if you remember, I actually got 2 deer on my 3rd hunt of the season. So I've got a better than 100% success rate. Well, if you're counting 1 deer per hunt. Now, this is the first time I've ever gone out and the first 3 hunts of the season harvested deer. And in fact, in 3 hunts, I've got 4 deer down. Now, if you remember, I need 5 doe to qualify for the bonus buck tag the following year, and in 3 hunts I've got 4 down. So part of me, I was joking in my mind, I'm like, what's going to end up happening is I'm either not going to get the 5th doe, or it's going to come at the very end of the season, which was really prophetic. Like, it ended up happening, as you know. We'll get into some more of that in a little bit. But while that whole hunt was going on, I shot the first one. I had an opportunity at another one that came running back through. I was like, I'm not going to be greedy. And then a little while after that, I had a doe and a fawn just hanging out there for a long time. And I'm like, all right, if this doe gives me a really perfect broadside shot, I'll take it. And at one point, I thought it wasn't going to happen because the doe started like sneezing and it almost sounded like snorting. So the fawn ran off and I thought that was going to spook the doe, but it didn't. The doe just hung there and started like pounding its nose with its hoof. It must have had like a bug fly up its nose or something. And so anyway, eventually the deer calmed down and I was able to get the shot, and it died quickly. So there I was. I had 2 deer. I put them on my cart, and the property that I'm hunting is extremely steep to get out of there. So trying to get the 2 of those doe up this steep embankment, like my feet just kept sliding out from under me. It took me probably an hour to go 90 yards to get them up. That was a tough climb to get those deer out. And boy, it motivated me to get creative and come up with some ideas for in the future. You'll have to stay tuned if I get a deer there next year and the way that I decided I'm going to try to deal with it. We'll see if it actually works. All right, after I had 4 deer down, I took a little break and I took some other people out. I took my son out. He almost got a shot at a deer on our very first hunt. We had a doe come in 5 yards and he had his finger on the release trigger. As he went to pull, it popped off and the arrow went into the ground right there and spooked the doe off. It was a lot of fun. Maybe next year. We'll keep working at it. But close encounter. Then I did the Field to Fork program. I was involved with that this year. And I went out with one of the new hunters to film her first hunt. And, that video's up. Unfortunately, we didn't get one that night, but she was successful. She did get some deer this year. But that night we were hanging out in the barn, talking with some people involved with the program. And one of the individuals said, a quote that he had heard from somewhere that, see if I remember it. I'd rather be in the tree stand thinking about God than in church thinking about hunting. I think that's how it went. And I thought, that kind of misses the mark. I mean, I could definitely see a lot of hunters saying that, but really that's an excuse to not do what God asks us to do. God calls us to worship him as a community, and that's exemplified even all the way back in the Old Testament. He called the Israelites out of Egypt to worship him. That was what it was all about. In fact, that's what it started it all. All God was asking was for Pharaoh to let them go worship him, and then they would go back. But since Pharaoh didn't do that, then all the plagues and all that, and then it just turned into what it did, and God set his people free from slavery. But anyway, he does call us, to keep holy the Lord's day and worship him as a community. And so here's another thing that gets lost in modern day Christianity that misses the Old Testament roots is that God's people were a priestly people that offered sacrifice. And in the modern expression of that, we're not called to offer sacrifices like they did, but we are called to offer sacrifice to God. And so going to church is that sacrifice when you really would like to go hunting. So your prayer becomes, Lord, I choose you. You are more important to me than anything, and I sacrifice this desire of wanting to go hunting to you because you are worth it. You're worthy of my sacrifice and my time. And so, anyhow, I was kind of thinking, I didn't say anything in the situation, but hey, if you're one of those people that says, I'd rather think about God in a tree stand rather than think about hunting while I'm in church, get yourself to church and turn that into your prayer. Like, hey, Lord, you know that my human desire is to be out hunting right now, but in love, I choose you. All right, the next deer was this buck right here. So yes, I mounted it. This is the first nice buck I shot this year. And it was over that scrape that I had made with the jute rope hanging. So a lot of people have asked me, like, what kind of scent did you use? What kind of rope did you use? I just bought a jute rope. I think it was 3/8 of an inch, diameter. It was cheap. It was probably like $25 for a 50-foot roll of rope or whatever, and something along that line. I didn't put any scent at all down. All I did was I hung the rope in like September, near the beginning of September, like before they all really start ripping out scrapes and stuff. I wanted to be one of the first ones down to kind of send a message like, this is the spot. So early September, hung the rope, and it was a lot of waist-high weeds there. I just cleared a big circle in the ground, probably like 4 foot in diameter, just like ripped it out right under that. And it really stood out. So a deer walking by is going to see that rope and it's going to see that. And that same night, I had deer on camera checking out the scrape already. And when they're checking it out, obviously they're sniffing and licking at the rope. So right away, they were putting their own scent on the situation. I didn't need to put any scent at all down. Now, the morning of that hunt, I didn't say this in the video, but when I got to the property and I'm walking to my stand, there was deer that I bumped and I spooked the whole area up and they took off running and I was like, ugh, but I got set up anyway. I was probably 45 minutes to an hour before it even started cracking daylight. So I just got in stand, I got quiet. And what deer will often do, I've seen this many times, especially with doe, if you bump them out or you make a little noise in the morning and they're not sure what it is, they come in to investigate after it's daylight. So after it got daylight, that doe came back with the fawn. And I'll also mention this. This is early November, but I have not been in this stand at all this year. I was there that one time in September to set up the rope and my camera, and that's it. That's the only other time I was on this property for the whole year was to set up that rope, and now I'm back for the very first time to hunt it. So the deer have not been pressured at all at this spot. So they're not used to being bumped out, and so they're coming in to check it out. The doe and the fawn are like right under me, and as I'm like not trying to not move and get spotted, I hear a buck making a scrape right over here, and I'm like, oh man, and I look over, and it was that buck that I passed. He came out and then looped around. There was another buck I didn't even get footage of, a shooter that morning, and the wind was supposed to be like a southwest wind, and I was getting east all morning. It was just blowing my scent right out into that field, and there was a big shooter coming across that field, and then he just turned and he stayed out of the woods rather than come in like he was going to, and I think he just smelled me, and so he just was like, I'm going to go up this way. But as you know, I ended up getting that one, so it all worked out. And what happened was, I was actually about out of time. I'm like, all right, because I was going to go to church that morning and just wanted the later services. And I was like, I'm going to give it like another 15 minutes. And right around when I was thinking that, I heard a squirrel go nuts behind me. And I learned a long time ago, one time I grunted in the woods and then a chipmunk or a squirrel went berserk. And then just a few minutes later, a buck came ripping in. I think what the buck did, he started to make a rub to try to intimidate what he thought was another buck grunting. And so this is a common thing I've observed in the woods, is when you hear a squirrel or a chipmunk go crazy, sometimes it's from a deer or another animal. In fact, last year I was out in Colorado. I heard a squirrel go nuts, and I looked over, and a moose went walking past me at 20 yards. Couldn't shoot a moose. I didn't have a moose tag, but there was a big bull moose going right past me. I was like, whoa. But the squirrel was yelling at the big moose coming through. So I'm just mentioning that if you're ever in the woods and you hear a squirrel go crazy, hey, get ready, because maybe something's coming. And as you saw in that situation, this guy, like a minute later, a little bit later, when I looked back there, I didn't see anything, but there's a lot of thick leaves and stuff. And a little bit later, I looked down and he was right there at the scrape. And as you know, I got a good shot on him and brought him home. Wow. Oh my goodness, what a deer, man. He's huge. He's so big. Holy cow, he's huge. What a big, huge body. Oh, look at that. Nice buck. Praise the Lord right there. Yeah. All right, the next video was the 8-pointer I shot on my new property. Nice deer, but that whole video was kind of like let's say behind the scenes. I gave you all the background of getting the property and everything, so I kind of told you everything. So let's go right into the next deer after that. Was the Urban Zone buck I harvested. It's a really nice deer, but I gotta be honest, I really hesitated for a minute to shoot, because you guys don't know what happened last year. So last year, hunting in this area, a giant 10-pointer showed up. And I had a few encounters with him at the very end of the season. In fact, my very last hunt of the year, I had a shot at that giant 10-pointer. So what happened was the bow that I had used all season, I had a tuning issue with it. And I was like, you know what? I've been wanting to make a set of strings and cables for my old bow, my old Hoyt that my wife gave me as a wedding gift 17 years ago. I was like, you know what? I'm going to make new string and cables for that, and I'm going to use that for my last hunt of the year. So I made the string and cables, tuned it up, got it shooting, and I went out that night, and that deer came in with probably maybe 5 minutes left of daylight. It was really near the end. And I drew back. What I didn't anticipate was my eye went immediately to the second pin, which is the 30-yard pin, and it didn't compute in my head, because in my head I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I'm going to get this deer. This is a 20-yard shot. I can make this in my sleep. And so I'm kind of like, I can't believe this is about to happen. And I take the shot, and the deer ends up ducking, and the arrow, I thought I hit it. And I was so like beside myself. For the first time in my life, I like couldn't talk. Here's the clip.
Meh.
Oh my goodness. I think my pin was at a little high. I either got high long or I was. I can't talk. God, please let me get that deer. I can't talk. I'm gonna turn the camera off. I can't talk. I can't talk right now. So I had called that buck in from like 80 yards away. I didn't think he was going to come in, but he came in at the last minute, and then that happened. At least it was a clean miss, but
Meh.
in looking at everything later, the second pin on that sight that I used gets brighter than the first pin in low light. And remember, this is a bow my wife gave me 17 years ago as a wedding present, and I haven't used it probably 7 years. You know, it's been a long time since I've even used it, and the sight that I've been using since, the first pin in the sight is always the brightest, especially in low light. So in my mind, my eye just went to that brightest pin, and I ended up botching it, because of that. Like, I just didn't think about that clearly enough. And so anyhow, that deer, I looked for its sheds. I ran cameras. I never saw that deer ever again after that night. So he moved out of the town. So anyhow, when this buck came in, I still had that other 10-pointer in my mind. I'm like, you never know if that guy's going to show up or whatever. And I was like, I can't pass. I'm gonna take this shot at this buck. We could call him the Leaning Brow-Tine buck. He's like, yeah. But really great mass, solid deer. Now, one thing that I saved the hide. I haven't had a chance to work on it yet to mount it like that one there. But I'm not sure if it's even going to work out because I actually gave the meat from this deer to a friend of mine. But I got a trail camera picture of this deer the day before, or I forget if it was the day before or just before I got it, recently before I got it. And in the trail camera picture, I'm like, something doesn't look right with that deer. It looks like it's way too skinny for that frame. And so anyway, when I was processing the deer, my friend who I was giving the meat to was here. And well, actually, I was just caping it out at first. And I'm like, man, did he fart or something? And we got to looking. Turns out this deer had a massive infection in his cheek. And there was like a pus in his cheek, which is what the smell was. And I don't know what caused the infection, but that's probably why he was underweight, is he was having trouble eating because of the infection he had in his mouth. So a great deer to take out because of that. Just an infection in the cheek. I don't know if maybe fighting he caught like an antler through the cheek, and now it's all infected. So I'm not 100% sure what caused the infection. Everything else was fine with the deer. It's just that element. So I don't know when it goes. I froze the hide until I have time to do the mount or try to do the mount. But I don't know if that infection is going to end up causing a problem and preventing me from being able to use the hide for doing a mount. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm sitting here editing this video, and I realized I forgot to tell you one of the funniest things that happened. So when I was hunting this stand, I was passing on bucks just walking by me, and because I knew there were bigger ones in the area. And after like a day or two, like the landowner was like, hey, so I was watching out the window and I saw you just had this buck walk right by and you didn't do anything. So like, what's that about? Because this is the guy that wants the deer gone. I'm like, well, I know there's some bigger ones around, so I was just kind of waiting for that. So I don't know, it just made me kind of laugh. And I forgot to tell you about that. All right, folks, down to the end of the season. I needed one more doe in the urban zone to qualify for the bonus buck tag for next year. And, I've hunted my spots that I have in the urban zone. I'm just not seeing any doe. I'm not getting any opportunities. Well, let me correct myself. I've had opportunities. I was at full draw 4 different times, or different times throughout the season. And I was like, no, I'm waiting for a good quality shot in the urban zone. I'm just holding myself to that standard. And it just wasn't happening. It just wasn't coming together. And I was like, okay, Lord, you know what? If you don't want me to have the bonus buck tag, I accept that, But I'm trying to have the discipline to wait for that quality shot. So as I was starting to say, my spots were just not putting out deer opportunities or doe opportunities, as we were approaching the end of the season. So, I started to think, man, it just may not happen. And I started to talk about it in the office. I work at a church, so there's several ladies in the office. And the one lady's like, well, what about so-and-so? They just moved into a new house and I've heard they got deer in their backyard. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. So, turns out the guy who she was referring to joined our new men's group that we started in the morning. So I'm like, hey, after the men's group meeting that week, I'm like, hey, do you got deer in your yard? Do you mind if anybody hunts there? And so we looked at the map. He met the criteria that I need for the urban zone. He signed the paper for me. I went and printed it out since he was like, yeah, that's fine. He signed it for me. And so then I went over there and I set up a stand. And well, actually, he invited me over to just look. So we look out the window. He's like, you could use that tree right there, right in the middle of the backyard. I'm like, all right. So I didn't even get to go out to the tree. So the next time I went, I set up the stand, and that doe comes running right in, and they're all watching me out the window. It's like watching TV, and I'm like at full draw, and they're all like, "Oh my goodness, he's gonna shoot!" And I just never got the shot. And so then I went back there another in the morning, and when I showed up, there was like 5 deer in the yard right by the road, like not far from the road. When I pulled up, and I'm like, oh goodness, this isn't gonna work. So I'm like, all right. So I get out of the car, and they're used to a little bit of human movement, so they didn't just run off, but they kind of moved off to the side a little bit. And so I was like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go around the other way around the house and try to get in the stand. Well, the wind's blowing at like 30 to 40 miles an hour that way. I mean, it was ripping. And my, I'm looking over there because it's in my bag. I'll grab it for you to show you. But my bow hoist rope is a strap like an inch wide. It's not just a rope. And so the wind was blowing the strap real bad. Hang on a second. I've had this for like probably 25 years. I've had this since I was, a young college kid hunting. And so this thing is ancient, really, in a sense. But the wind was blowing that, and it was wrapping around in my climbing sticks because I had a climbing sticks and a hang-on in this situation. So I go to pull my bow up. I can't because this is all wrapped up in the climbing sticks. So I climb back down, I climb all the way down. My foot's on the bottom, step of the climbing stick. I get it all out of the climbing sticks, and then I kind of put it around a little twig so that it doesn't blow back into the sticks. I climb all the way back up, and I go to hoist it. Well, here it was wrapped around the bottom of the bottom, just the very bottom where my foot was. I thought it was clear, but it wasn't. Well, at this point, I got to go back down, get it out, and then climb back up. And by the time I made it back into the tree stand that second time, I saw the deer. I was making little noises here and there. They were like, something's not right, and they walk off. So I didn't even get a shot that morning. But one thing that happened as I was sitting there is probably, 45 minutes after daylight, half hour after daylight, whatever it was. I'm sitting there, and right past the house I'm hunting at is a cul-de-sac. And this particular setup, the houses I didn't like the setup because of how tight the houses were in the area. Like people could just see me sitting in a tree stand, like the neighbors could. And the homeowner told them I was going to be there, and they knew it and everything, but it's just still awkward for me. I don't like being watched really. But I'm trying to get that last doe. So anyway, this truck comes down really slow and turns around the cul-de-sac and slowly goes back out. I'm like, what's the person doing? Do they know I'm here? Are they just like checking me out? But the truck kind of just had that sense of a hunter. It looked like a hunter, And so the truck drives off, and I'm sitting in a stand. And then down off in the distance, there's another road that I can see from the stand location. And that same truck goes creeping up that another road. Now, out in front of me, they're actually clearing it out. They're going to be building a bunch of more houses right there next year. So the property I'm in, there's a thick tree line. And on the other side of the thick tree line, there's this wide open cleared out spot that they're going to be building in. And they're going to put a road right there. And so the guy's driving really slow by that to see if there's any deer walking around out there. That's the impression I got. And I was like, So I think that person's checking and looking for deer, like looking to see where the deer are at, which made me think, well, maybe I should drive around and see where the deer are at. So the next day was a Saturday. And I was like, I don't know, the next day that I could hunt was a Saturday. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to take the day off from hunting, spend the whole day with my family. And like around an hour before dark, I had to run a quick errand. It was only going to take me a minute. But I was like, you know what? Let me just drive by that neighborhood real quick. So I drove up in the direction where that other truck went, and I saw like a bunch of deer like in the area. I'm like, wow, there's a lot of deer around here. And I need to ask permission at one of these places. So the next morning, I figured after I get home from church, like at noon or whatever, I'm going to just push myself to go over there and knock on one of the doors. So I didn't want to do it. I wasn't in the mood to put myself in that position, but I was like, I got to do it. You got to make yourself do it. So I went over there while I was still in my church clothes, knocked on the door, rang the doorbell. It's one of those ring bells so that, it's video. They can see me. And I'm just kind of standing there. Nobody comes to the door. I'm like, all right, well, that's all right. I tried, And I get in the car and I'm getting ready to leave. And I look over and the guy has a workshop next to the house. He comes walking out. I put down the window. I start talking. He invites me into the workshop. We're chatting. He's like, yeah, you can hunt here. And I'm like, oh my. Folks, I want to finish this video. So I'm going to do it. And my camera that I've been using to film so far, the battery keeps dying. And so it keeps shutting off. And that's another thing going on in the background. And I keep waiting for it to charge for a little while and doing it. But it's after 10 o'clock at night. I want to finish up, but there's one last thing I want to tell you about. So after I got permission to hunt this property, the guy showed me where the property lines were. Plus I have an app on my phone, so I knew where the property lines were. And we saw a couple deer in the woods while he was showing me the property line. I'm like, this is great. Well, that evening I went back and here it is right here. So this white camo that I was wearing in the video, I bought this like 25 years ago when I was like young. Like I was more than 25 years. I was probably like around 20 years old, and I'm 50 now. So 30 years ago, it's around when I bought this for myself. And it's camo. It's reversible, so it's a full body suit. And the funny thing is, when I went to use it on this hunt because there was snow on the ground, like I put my hands in the pockets, and it's so old, the material was like disintegrating in the pocket. And actually it's in this trash bag right here. I threw it in here. I pulled out a wad this is the material that was disintegrating. It's because it's 30 years old. But you know what? I never actually used it that much back when I bought it. And I went into a religious order after college. So for years I didn't use it. And anyhow, I finally got to take a deer wearing that white camo. I've probably worn it a few times in the past, but gotta finally get a deer with that. There's one other important point that I really want to make from this last hunt, and that is, if I would have got that fifth doe any point during the season or earlier, I wouldn't have kind of really had to search at the end of the season like I did. And it was only because of the way I really needed to keep looking to try to find another spot to help me get that last deer that I got this plot. And I've been texting with that landowner multiple times. We've had some nice conversations. It's kind of like a new friend, And he's invited me back. He's excited for me to get more deer, and he does have a lot of deer. And one thing I forgot to say is the first night when I hunted there, the only deer, well, there's two deer that gave me a really clear shot 4 yards away, and it was two nice buck. One of which was the buck that I got a little footage of at the end of that hunt. Now, you can't really see it in the footage I got, and I didn't get footage of him the first night because I was just standing still. But he's a mainframe 10 with a bunch of extra points at the base of the left side. So he was about 14 pointer, and he had actually an extra point up in here between the tines on the one side. So anyhow, maybe I'll get a crack at it next year. But the point is, I got a new spot that's really good. And I got it because of adversity. So if you're ever struggling and things aren't working out, you're not getting a deer or whatever, use it as motivation to keep pushing yourself. Like, okay, what else can I do? In my situation, I was like, well, maybe I can look for another property. I wanted to say that as an encouragement to you. If you're ever struggling out there, use it as like pray and use it as motivation. I was praying, and I really felt like the way it worked out was God's way of leading me. Anyhow, folks, thank you so much for tuning into this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. And let me just tell you this. The reason why I did things the way I did this year is because I get lots of complaints. Over the years, I've gotten complaints. You talk too much. So I was like, all right, I'll just put videos together. I'll just put the hunting footage together. I'm not going to say a whole lot. But for those of you who like the long-windedness of me and my storytelling, you got this video. And so make sure you get in on the giveaway. If you haven't already, stay tuned for that. Thanks so much. Until next time, take care. God bless.